I'll every now and then I'll have an idea and think, oh, I need to think about that. Is that something that I really need to focus on or not? But it's all in the realm of pastoral care, which is not too far from where I was in the
Yeah.
first place.
Yeah.
So I'm definitely still sort of sticking towards how does the church respond, to all of the instability and that trauma brings, and just there's so much I could focus on, so I need to narrow it down.
and use what you got. So you need to hear. I don't want you to go out chasing a lot more rabbit trails. For like,
No. Mm-hmm.
I do think I will email this to you. I was going to show it on a screen share, but if you're looking at a phone, that's not going to work. And more importantly, I am recording this so I can put it on YouTube so you can review it later.
Oh, okay, great. Mm-hmm. Yeah,
But I think maybe there is one, and it's not a seismic shift. So I hope you hear this. There is one shift from what you started with to where I think going forward you could still use in the same way. Okay.
Okay.
So your original kind of problem was, how do I infuse a sacramental understanding of the Eucharist into clergy education? And the idea was, can I build an argument for it that so clergy would embrace it, and then maybe create a retreat where I could do this through a clergy education methodology on the back end. So it was
right.
That front end with a method on the back that was going to be writing a curriculum for a retreat, somebody like Doug Hardy or somebody helping you think through all that. I think now probably a better way to think about this is in the language of pastoral care, and basically say that how is it that we help both congregations in Ukraine, but I would even say with the refugee issue, congregations globally deal with the trauma that Ukrainian people have experienced in a way that is transformative, and that we can do that by harnessing the power of the Eucharist.
Right.
So the centerpiece of your shifting your focus of what's the problem has changed, but everything you've been writing up to this point still serves this other need. Then down the road, if you ever need to, saying, oh, by the way, we need to teach this to clergy. But I'm thinking of both churches in Ukraine, churches in Poland, churches in the United States, places where refugees are at this point, churches that reconstitute themselves in Ukraine, hopefully as soon as the invasion is over, or even in the midst of the decline of the invasion, that you're providing them a kind of big vision of what this might look like from that standpoint. Now, one way to think about it, and I'm just going to, I hope, listen to me and see if this makes sense to you. One thing you sent me was to send me back the outline that Levi puts out, which is, the introduction, review of literature,
right,
theological thesis, kind of thing, methodology, and implications, which has never been a good way to write a monograph, but it's a great way to organize a bunch of material without having to do a lot of synthetic work. You put all your eggs into one chapter that kind of does some of the synthesis midway through. So I think if we adopt that approach, your introduction.
My understanding was that I had to submit it that way.
Well, my understanding was, particularly the students in the first and second year, since they didn't even have guidelines for what that looked like, is that you did not have to. And I've had 2 or 3 students who did not use that.
Okay. That would have been nice.
And truthfully, the way that works in DMin world is it's built around a social science model where the methodology is something you actually apply. So you would do this kind of, one way to think about it in social science is, I see this problem, I reviewed all this literature, I've seen, in an EDD, I've seen kids struggle with reading. So why is that a problem? Well, here's the whole themes in the review of literature of what reading looks like. Therefore, my method is I'm going to implement this new reading program. Then I would test it and see if it worked or not, and I'd write up my conclusions. And so it was really a model based on the creation of an instrument, literally almost like scientific method, that you would test in a social context to see whether it works or not.
Right.
When the D-men dropped that piece, instead they'd say, well, I'm going to create this teaching program and it's an artifact and it meets the conditions for publication, where somebody could actually try to use it. But I don't know if it's going to work yet or not. We'll figure that out later. But at least it's complete enough I can hand to somebody and they could use it. Or I'm going to propose a methodology on the back end that is a lengthy explanation of what that test might look like and its potential implications. That's different from and you know, we've talked about this. That's different from a PhD, which says this is the argument, and I'm going to convince you through the flow of the writing, not through some kind of instrument later, but through the flow of the writing to agree with my perspective. And that's using the research to write a compelling argument, as opposed to using the research to build an instrument that you hope will prove to be right somewhere down the line.
Right.
So I think though we can still use this language. So let me kind of walk you through, and I'll send this to you, and you'll have the video. So you have both my voice and the outline. And then when you can, a week from next week, I'm gone, but say 2 weeks from now, we can schedule another one of these and we can talk through the implications of it.
Great.
Okay.
Yes. Perfect.
So thinking about big rocks. So one thing you're just going to have to deal with the problem. And again, I think the problem now is less unprepared clergy, but it's still the same problem. It's unprepared congregations and clergy to deal with the kind of trauma. And hear this language: trauma-informed ministry that occurs when they have Ukrainians in their midst. And how would you do that? And you can go ahead, and I would just say the thesis would be, well, you do that in part through tapping into their love of commensality, table fellowship, through the table fellowship of the Eucharist, particularly understood through a Wesleyan understanding of the Eucharist as a means of grace. And that then provides a way of helping Ukrainian people as they enter into any church, any congregation, both receive and respond to and deal with trauma through the sort of the worship of the church and the teaching of the church.
Yes.
And that's not that much different, but what you've done, the thing we had a long conversation about is, does trauma come up high or do we keep it in the background? I didn't want you to come up with methods for counseling, but I do think trauma-informed ministry, with scare quotes around that, trauma-informed ministry, really takes seriously the Eucharistic life of the church is one way to think about what you're trying to communicate through the dissertation. Okay, so the literature review would be the experience and practice. This is the culture and social components of Ukraine, the lives of Ukrainian people. And so I'm going to recommend you start with sort of their experience and practice as a culture, both their experience of trauma and their practice of commensality or table fellowship. And that would be in the chapter 2 literature. So here's the context, and I'm giving you a full, deep background. And then chapter 3 is I'm going to then offer a theological response to that context. So you've got this in you've got this in your dissertation. So I hope you hear. It's just chapter 2 is going to be basically after an introduction. It maps a chapter. It's really, here's my section on the history of trauma in Ukraine. You can then kind of walk through that. Here's my definition of trauma and its impact. And I am thinking then someone like a Brandon Sipes or others who's just been involved in trauma-informed ministry could be your second reader. So we're not looking for Doug or spiritual formation guru. It's really someone to say, yeah, is this a good, yeah, this looks like a good approach.
Right.
And then you would kind of cap it out with the table fellowship component. And really, the literature review is all around sort of the experiential side of your dissertation. Here's how things happen in Ukrainian culture, and this is how they've experienced that culture over time.
Mm-hmm.
Chapter 3, then, their outline, and I'm going to stick with it, is their biblical historical foundations for a thesis, is how they said it. And then you say, okay, so let's turn to the Eucharist, and let's even use a Wesleyan, partially because you included that as a part of the dissertation, but it was the first draft, but it was really late. So kind of letting people know we're gonna let the Wesleyan theology help us understand the Eucharist before it's over.
Mm-hmm.
But the first thing you do is you take the church history approach. Again, think of these as just big rocks or wells inside the chapter. So you just talk about, well, we just finished talking about with the Ukrainians table fellowship. Isn't it interesting how the Eucharist has always been a kind of way of transforming tables fellowship through the life of the church? Well, why is that? Well, partially because of our biblical understanding, but I'm going to be careful with that one. So just bear with me for a moment. But more importantly, because we have a Wesleyan understanding of the power of the Eucharist, is that it's a means of grace and it has a transforming presence in people's lives.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yes, in the history of the church, it's always been connected to table fellowship. And from a Wesleyan perspective, it's a means of grace. And you've got that, okay? The piece that you had in the middle was also this piece about how Jesus sort of treated the Eucharist from a biblical
Right.
point. And I really want you to hear, you can keep that. You can make it a small section of the table fellowship. You can make it a bigger section. But my concern was you were basing a lot of that off of really just one source. And unless you can find a couple other sources easily, and this is really important to me, it either becomes a part of that historical biblical overview, and it's just a smaller section of that, or it becomes an independent section if you go, this is really important. This is why we see Jesus in the midst. And it's whether you need Jesus or you just need a good Wesleyan theology of the Eucharist. It's really more what you want to accomplish from that.
Okay.
All right, so that's chapter 1's the introduction. Chapter 2 is literature review, primarily of the experience of the culture of the Ukrainian people. Chapter 3 then is, here's my church history / Bible, but particularly / Wesleyan theological understanding of the Eucharist. And now we can understand that the Eucharist can be a potential transforming presence in the lives of people who are suffering from trauma. And then the reader's going to say, why? And that's your methodology chapter 4, where you go, well, we're going to do this because that Eucharistic presence provides the safe community. It provides meaningful memory and witness. And it provides resurrected holistic life, overcoming fragmentation. That becomes chapter 4. And it's really talking about how that, if we approach the Eucharist as Wesleyans, approach the Eucharist, seeing that these 3 things are really important, this idea of a safe community, meaningful memory, and resurrected life, then that will make all the difference to the world in the way it ministers to trauma-informed people, all through this gathering that taps into table fellowship. And that one way to think about it, it can happen in worship, but it can also happen around table meals, just
That's right.
those themes going. These 3 things could happen as we exercise, and I'll use this word, hospitality to refugees as churches reconfigure in Ukraine. And we just keep these 3 big methods at work: safe community, meaningful memory, resurrected holistic life. Then that's how we can make all the difference. This is the trauma-informed ministry that comes out of the Eucharist. All the difference.
Yeah.
That making sense?
Yes.
Okay. Then the last thing I put in this outline is so the implications of that. There are two pieces you use that's words that appear several places, normally an introduction or others. And I would just say, how do they really work? So I saved them to this back end. So you could say, the first one I'm going to suggest is adapting ritual, identity, hospitality, and hope when working with Ukrainian people. Now that could be up in chapter 4, because that could be a way of seeing the 3 and the 4 kind of working together. But so it could even be a conclusion to chapter 4. So as we adapt ritual, as we address identity, as we exercise hospitality, and as we communicate hope, this will make a difference for trauma-informed ministry. So it could be there. But in the implications, you also had this language very early in the last draft of ministry through imagination, formation, and instruction. And that could be basically where toward the end, very end of the dissertation, no time before that, you say, if we ignite people's imagination around this vision, if we provide instruction to ministers, and as we provide guidelines for formation around these big 3 methodologies, this is how the implications is we do these things, then this will be a really robust trauma-informed ministry. Now I'm going to stop. That's been me wrestling with big table rocks, but do you feel anything that you've got a passion about missing in that giant overview?
Maybe it's just stuff I'm wrestling with, because it's been such an interesting experience to actually be going through the trauma myself. And then to and again, just a few moments where I've said, does that dissertation make sense to me right now? Which has been a good experience for me. So it's more just theological. What do I really believe? Because those are the big questions that I think that Ukrainians are going to have to wrestle with, congregations, and just wondering, where that fits, how, but I think at the same time, I think if you approach the Eucharist, the theology behind the Eucharist, well, you're touching on some of those themes of atonement and forgiveness, and but yeah, it's still really fuzzy in my head.
That's okay.
And it's a lot, to add. I realize that, but I don't think you can really help people, I think, who are traumatized without really helping them wrestle through some of those things. But it's all, I think it's all something that can be worked into what you're suggesting. And yeah. Well, I just need time to sort of maybe sit down and really reflect, with the pieces.
And that's what I really want you to hear. You've got a lot of different pieces of work here.
Right.
And it's really, what is the flow through?
Yes.
And how does that work well? Now, the good news is, I think earlier there was an attempt to try to do a lot more interactive pieces around these big rocks, if you will.
Right.
This kind of an outline, other than writing an introduction, you don't have to show, for instance, how, basically table fellowship in Ukraine matches anything about early table fellowship in New Testament. Was the New Testament table fellowship worried about the same thing that Ukrainians are concerned with at table fellowship? You don't have to do those things. You kind of firewall off some of those pieces.
Oh, yeah.
Where you have to kind of, and this is why I'll send this outline to you, it is whether or not, 2 things. One, do you really believe that when we gather at the Eucharist, if it's, if done well, that there is a transformative presence that can be healing in the midst, that provides a healing presence in the midst of people shaped and hit by trauma. Now, that if done well is really important there, because I could think of a lot of Eucharistic practices that would just accentuate the trauma instead of harm it. But you're not here to write a chapter on 18 different ways the Eucharist can be done poorly. It's
Right.
you really believe, and I'll just say it as a Wesleyan, you really believe that the Eucharist is a
Mhm.
means of grace.
Mhm.
And if so, what is it that the Eucharist could do if we take it seriously? And then this goes back to, you've already written at least the front end of it. I mean, you've already written this piece in there, so you be
Mhm.
dwelling with it for a while. Do you really believe that when people gather at the Eucharist, it affords them the opportunity to understand that the Eucharist brings about a safe community that can overcome isolation and fear? Doesn't always do it, but it can do that. Do you
Right.
believe that place of gathering at the Eucharist, the liturgy as well as the event of the Eucharist, is a place for meaningful memory and witness? That this is a place where good stories and important stories can be told as a part of what's going on. And
Mhm.
that needs to be a part of what's happening. And do you actually do believe this third piece is that in talking about the resurrection, that you have some kind of vision of holistic life that overcomes fragmentation, the brokenness, and the insanity of times of war, times of trauma,
Mhm.
and that maybe not. And you need to hear it might be different when you're right in the midst of the trauma, as opposed to up until when we were first writing this. It was about a
Mhm.
history of trauma that's now being lived one more time.
Right.
So if you have to own anything, I think for the dissertation, in the way this is organized, this is the famous phrase that's already in the outline, why this matters. And do you really think that gathering for Eucharist as people, that
Mhm.
this can make a difference, whether it is for a, 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 a remnant congregation right now in Ukraine,
Right.
for a refugee community in
Right.
Poland,
Right.
or for two or three refugees who show up at a USA church who normally is culturally clueless to all
Right.
of this. But could at least that, if the church took that seriously and tried to ensure that this is going to happen first in the Eucharist and then in the way in which other practices that follow this logic appear in their church,
Right.
at least the Ukrainian people could find places of hope.
Mhm.
Use your big four at the end, not only just ritual, but they can find a way of naming themselves. They can feel hospitality, and there is a whisper of hope that's
Mhm.
available to them. If when you finally sit down to write, if you can buy into that, I think
Mhm.
you have a place to begin. Some of this is going to be, okay, I put all this material in this chapter, now I got to move it under this. So I would say practically when I send this, use this as an outline, and
Mhm.
then use a copy paste mechanism to get some of the big rocks back where it should go. And yeah, you'll
Right.
drive you nuts with footnotes and stuff, but it's just getting the material so you can see the big rocks all together.
Yes.
And then I would take the outline I'm going to send you, and if it works, I would write introductions to the chapters based on this outline.
Okay.
Um, and then you can copy and paste those into the bigger piece. And then that helps you begin to nuance and massage the transitions between sections from that stuff.
Okay.
Does
That
that make
makes sense.
sense?
Mhm.
But it's
Mhm.
preserving what you've done, it's just getting it reorganized.
Yep.
Um, there'll be some
Yeah.
pieces you may have to kick to the curb. The one I know you don't want to let go of is the menorah story. But unless you can figure out how that fits in the introduction,
No, I think it's there's a lot I think that I feel like, we don't need that anymore. Mhm.
and I really want you to hear, if it's sitting down with someone, if Brandon's the right person, if it's somebody else, you let me know. I'll go to work with Levi right away, getting your second reader so you have a conversation partner.
Yeah.
Hopefully somebody that, in talking about the trauma and dealing with, would be
Yeah.
somebody who has the kind of listening ear that can be a friend in that conversation, and as well
Absolutely.
as a consultant for the writing of the dissertation. Okay.
Yeah, Brandon's great. Has he been a reader before?
I don't think so, but that doesn't mean he can't be now. Second readers, we really are going for someone that no one else can deal with.
Mm.
And the reason, um, I know you'd mentioned Brad. I just know he's a Bible scholar, and if he'd have
Oh,
seen,
yeah,
you know,
that's
and
interesting.
truthfully, even if he'd seen the piece on Jesus, you'd have been in trouble. We'd be here another year. So
Right.
Brandon is the kind of person that could deal with what really needs to be at the heart and soul of
Hmm.
this DMin dissertation, and some of those other pieces we could just use selectively from those.
Right, right.
Okay.
Yeah. Hmm.
I hope this isn't too top down driven. What I'm trying to do is kind of get your big picture in place,
Hmm.
so you don't have to worry about that. And then it's more allowing that big picture to sort of drive those components that you've already done and put them
Right. Yeah.
and and create this in such a way that hopefully we can get it done. That's the most
Right.
important from my side.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that trauma informed care is yeah, a very important piece that needs to be done
Yeah, I
as
think,
quickly as
Sylvia,
possible.
I do think some of the things you've done in the paper. I mean, this is one reason why one of your papers appeared in Dedicate early. Some of the things you'll write out of this, whether it's a monograph or whether it's,
Hmm.
you may not want to do that, but at least a couple more articles out of this will
Hmm.
be very important information. It's I can't imagine now living through things that you recorded from the past yet one more time. So, um,
Yeah.
but it is the kind of information that I think for people who are one step removed from the force of that trauma, can really begin to appreciate the depths of both the resilience of the Ukrainian people, as well as that this is not something new from within their lives, that this has been just a part of their culture that they've been challenged by, which does not excuse what's happening now at all.
Right.
It helps us understand how Ukrainian people respond in the midst of this.
Right.
So,
Right. Right.
so there are pieces
Yeah.
that make a big difference.
Mhm.
You don't have to do that before you finish the dissertation. My goal really is to help you get the puppy done. Then
Yeah, yeah.
you know what you want to do after from that standpoint.
Right. Yeah. I'm actually looking forward to writing because I have so much. Um, it's been odd that the only times that write on Facebook is when I'm in the midst of that crazy, like when I'm in Ukraine going back or when I was there, like those thoughts just flowed. The adrenaline was, but yeah, now it's just survival. I'm actually really looking forward to time to reflect and yeah, be able to get back into the writing. Yeah, it will help me process my own trauma.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and I think that'll be important.
that,
I'm gonna be careful.
that,
Remember, you can use
that is that. Can you hear that?
what?
Oh, it's stopped. That's an alarm that's going off and a siren going off in Kyiv.
Oh my dear.
Yeah, I still have that going on.
Um,
Yeah.
two things. One, remember, personal reflection works well in the front end, so you're free to use that.
Mm-hmm.
And in the last chapter, even in the conclusions, really important place.
Mm-hmm.
But in
Right,
writing
right,
this, try to make room for the reader from that standpoint.
right. Mm-hmm.
The other thing, and I'm going to say this as your friend, but also as your first reader. If you can find someone who can help you on the copy editing side
Right.
early, so it's not just waiting till the last round, but just somebody who can work with some of the nuts and bolts pieces of this, so you're not having to worry about that in the midst of everything else you're having to do. Um, you might try to find a friend to make that happen.
Sure, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And and I suspect within the resources of NCM and other places you could find somebody. If not, I know a student actually from the second round
Cohort.
of the D-Min who, I mean, she's now been used as a copy editor for about 7 or 8 students, and
Yeah, huh, that's great.
whether she has the time's a question, but she has that kind of a gift. So
Oh, nice.
Okay.
Yep. Okay.
I've done a lot of talking. It's my tendency, so I apologize for that.
No, you're fine. You're fine. I'm glad you're recording it.
Well,
Yeah.
and I'll put that out on YouTube. Only you'll be able to see it. So just
Okay.
so you know, but so it's unlisted, but
Yeah.
at least you'll have this as a coaching guide, and I'll send you the Word document as well.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's helpful to me. And yeah, I'll have to think through, just yeah, I'll think through it and review that outline and see.
It's really important that I say, other than maybe just more what's happening right now. Nothing that you've done is lost in this
Right.
approach.
Yeah, I don't feel like that's true.
And
Yeah.
and all of it still serves a major project. So
Yeah.
so it's more reorganizing and going forward.
Yes.
And I think you'll have an excellent dissertation at the end. It will work well for you going forward from that standpoint.
Yeah, I hope. So this, originally, you may have forgotten this. Originally, we had said June 1st to submit.
I know.
Or maybe you did remember. Okay.
No, I did.
Okay.
And then I'd modified and sent reminders out to people on July 1st.
Oh, okay.
Okay. And I thought you were maybe because we had talked June 1st. Let me just be honest with you. I hadn't sent you a deadline, partially because what good would it have done in the midst of the chaos that you're involved in? So I know that.
Yeah.
October 15th, I mean, not October, August 15th. Will that buy you the space, you think?
Oh, yeah, I hope.
Okay.
Yeah, if we can get settled by June something, that would be amazing.
Okay, well, let's do this. Let's do this. July 1st, the reorganized draft. May not be pretty, but it's reorganized, follows the flow.
Yes.
And that gives you time to find your place somewhere you can be stable in June.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Then that gives us between July 1st to August 1st for me, and just because of the myriad responsibilities I've got this summer, to then bleed on that.
Yeah.
But also then be working so you can then have the time in early August to do the fine-tune work from that standpoint. Really want whatever we're planning on doing for defense, that by August 15th, that's the defense copy. And I'm assuming that's going to take at least one revision, because we're kind of back to getting all this material reworked.
Yeah.
And then me doing the thing I normally do. But it might be that July 1st copy is you're sending it to me.
Mm-hmm.
We have an agreement that you've got a copy editor on file, and I get that back to you sooner so the copy editor can work with you. So will that be okay?
I think so. Yeah, I think so.
That gives it, there's a wiggle room in that. But bottom line for me is whatever that defense draft looks like, it's a defense draft on the 15th of August. It's not the pre-draft, it's the defense draft. And that's the right. But you can still make revisions to, but it's good enough that you have a sense of the whole and the arguments there that that you can defend it. And we're asking bigger questions than, so why is this here and that there? Is a part of defense.
Okay.
Does that work?
Yes. Pray that we get housing soon.
I will. And as soon as, I really want you to hear, as soon as you're stable, relatively stable, drop me an email. Just say, I'm in a place, I'm going to start working. And then if we need to start talking about changes in deadlines, we can start talking about changes in deadlines at that point.
Okay, sounds good.
But I really think the minute you get the copy paste work done, and put in what you need to put in, don't put everything in to that revised version, then I think we'll have a better way of thinking about what needs to do to go forward. Okay.
Yeah. Yep. Sounds good.
All righty.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Hey, praying for you, lady. You need, and in the midst of everything else, and you stay in my prayers. United States is terrible about just sort of moving on to the next crisis, but
and what a crisis! I know.
Well, but this one is something that we need. We as the Church of Nazarene need to hold in our hearts and prayers
Yeah.
going forward.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
so I stalk you on Facebook like everybody else does these days, but just
Yeah.
if there's
Yeah.
something you need to pass along beyond that, just let me know, and you'll stay in my prayers at all times. Okay.
Thank you. Okay.